All right, everybody, as promised, I am back for round two for today of reviewing content on metaethics. And this next one is a video that actually just came out while I started the last video. And then I saw it came up and I'm going to go ahead and review it. I had a look at it already. Yeah, let's get into it. It's a video by Maverick Christian, and it's supposed to be proofs of moral objectivity. Also, let me make sure that I send this link off to people. If you don't already know, check the description. You could see the original video if you want to watch that, if you want to watch it later on your own time. You could also see a link to my link tree, which has all of the different sorts of stuff that you could find in my blog. You could find my Discord. And I'm going to send this to people on my Discord so that they know it's there. So let me send that over there. And then let's get started. Alrighty. No big preamble here. Let me just make sure the volume is good on this. Oh,
Hey everybody, Maverick Christian here.
yep, sounds good to me. And let's bump the speed up just a tad. Let's do 1.1. And all right, let's get to it. And let's see, are people in the comments? Yeah, we got Giacomo, you get 1,000 lance loot, and Arbitrary gets 500. All right, and then we'll see who gets to the 250. And nobody recommended this, so Travis, you're not getting any bonus bounty or anything. All right, let's get into it.
Hey everybody, Maverick Christian here. This episode will discuss some quick ways to argue for objective morality. Part 1, the conversational approach. By moral objectivism, I mean the idea that there are moral truths that hold independently of human belief and perception of them. I think a lot of supposed moral
All right, so good definition.
relativists are actually more
I shouldn't
conversational
interrupt
approach.
people in the middle of a sentence.
By moral objectivism, I mean the idea that there are moral truths that hold independently of
definition.
human belief and
Nothing wrong with it.
perception of them. I think a lot of supposed moral relativists are actually moral objectivists deep down. You can find
A lot of realists will say stuff like this, that relativists are really realists deep down. I find this really objectionable. It reminds me of Christians that say that atheists are there's no atheists in foxholes. I mean, that's a little bit different. Like that's, I guess, when you're put under pressure, I recognize their God. But still, the idea is that there's like this deep down we're like crypto realists. This is really objectionable, not because it's necessarily wrong, but because it's a very convenient, dismissive, and kind of, I think, condescending way of treating people who hold an opposing position. Where I often, if we're going to be in the department of psychologizing, fine, I'll psychologize. I think that people say this when they don't have good objections to a view. When people are overconfident about their views and they're so convinced that they are correct that it's inconceivable to them that someone could really disagree. And I think that the reasons that realists give for thinking relativists are realists deep down are shit. They're not good reasons. And we're not going to see good reasons from him for thinking this in this video. I don't think that this kind of attitude is a good attitude to take towards people with rival views, to think that deep down secretly people really agree with you. I think it's bad dialectically. I think it's borderline unethical unless you have very good evidence that it's true. I think it's a sneering and contemptuous way to treat people with opposing views. So if you think that sounds critical, that it's intended to. I don't like this attitude. I think it's a bad attitude. I really, really, really do not like it when someone says, like, imagine if I went around saying to theists, deep down in your heart, there is no God, and you're just coping and you're just afraid of death. Yeah, you might be right about some people, but that shouldn't be the kind of move that you make to try to show that people like that the view is wrong. And, this is supposed to be a video on proofs of objective morality. Even if everybody deep down just couldn't help it but believe in moral realism or objective morality, that wouldn't be a particularly good reason to think objective morality is true. It might just be that people are, if people are naturally drawn to believing in an afterlife, it doesn't mean there is an afterlife. Oh, maybe they're all desperate, just because, like really deep down, you really think this. Not really a good reason to think that it's true. You would have to tie that to there being some substantive epistemic rationale that is actually like warranted. And people being drawn towards realism, they could be drawn towards it for bad reasons. So I'm sorry to be a bit harsh towards that attitude, but I really, really, really don't like this attitude of thinking that people deep down really agree with you. All right. And we got Mason here for the 250 on Lance Loot. Welcome, everybody. We got Leophilius. We got Travis. Sictomorph says this guy had an awkward debate with James Fodor. I haven't seen it. What was the debate about? All right. Yeah, so Travis says here, I hope this is parody. I believe that a lot of relativists are actually realists deep down. I'll proceed to demonstrate this by showing that they engage in behavior completely compatible with relativism. Yeah, one of the things we'll see is either people will go on to say, deep down people are realists, and then they'll just go on to describe things that are totally consistent with anti-realism, or they'll offer this caricature. I mean, even if it's, but again, though, you might find some relativists that deep down are realists or would be realists on reflection. So like, is your goal here just to get people to like be in a state of reflective equilibrium where they happen to agree with you? I mean, I would hope that we get people to hold views that we think are true, not that we get people to just like merely get people to recognize that they have one view for a bad reason and then they adopt some other view. Okay, but what if that other view is held for a bad reason? So a person could be a relativist for bad reasons. You expose those bad reasons to them so they stop being a relativist and start being a realist. Okay, and then are they a realist for good reasons? It's not like you're the default if you're not a relativist is that you're a realist. So showing people that they're not really relativists wouldn't even show that they're realists in the first place. So I don't know what exactly is going on here. Everybody deep down secretly agrees with me type moves. Even showing that a person deep down doesn't really endorse the view that they currently hold doesn't mean that they endorse any specific alternative view. All right. Anyway, Andrew Moy says, isn't that Schaefer Lando's explicit view? What is this explicit view? That people deep down are relativists? I don't know about that. All right, let's get into it.
Find out whether a moral relativist is actually a moral objectivist by asking them a couple questions like this. Is it morally wrong for a man to torture an infant just for fun?
Yep.
Would it remain morally wrong if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him?
Yep.
Notice in that scenario, we would have something that's morally wrong when all human opinion says otherwise. So it seems that you do believe in at least one moral truth that holds independently of human opinion, and thus you do believe in objective morality.
I want it up on the screen. I'm tempted to just do the oh my God, this is terrible. So Travis in the audience has a great video where he talks about this. This is Travis Talks, who's here right in the stream. So welcome, Travis. You have a really good concise video. It's like 7 or 8 minutes, I think. So where do I even begin? So let's say you're going through these questions. Okay, is it morally wrong for a man to torture an infant? One second, let me get a drink and get my head working before I start trying to read things. All right. Is it morally wrong for a man to torture an infant just for fun? Yeah, that's morally wrong. That would be my judgment. Would it remain morally wrong if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him? Yep. Yeah, it still remained wrong. So, am I a realist? No. It's still going to depend on what it means when I say that it's wrong. So, let's unpack what I think as a moral anti-realist as I'm going through these questions and judging them. Is it morally wrong for men to torture an infant just for fun? Well, I ask myself, do I morally disapprove of people torturing infants just for fun? Yes, I do. Okay, so would I continue to disapprove of infant torture if the infant torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him? Well, did he kill me? Okay, so now we have a problem here. So when you're asking me, would it remain morally wrong if he killed everyone, including me? Would it still be wrong relative to what standard? To my standard outside the hypothetical world in which I'm killed? The actual me, like the me sitting in this chair reviewing this video right now. Or are you asking, would it remain wrong in that world? Well, we need to you need to disambiguate. So this is an ambiguous question. And the problem with this sort of setup is this is supposed to be some sort of gotcha that shows that people, because people are not going to want to say, yeah, if the guy killed everybody, then that somehow that would make it right or wrong. I don't think whether torture is right or wrong is like determined by whether or not there's anybody that exists to oppose it. Whether it's right or wrong can only be judged relative to different moral standards. And if you're asking me outside this hypothetical universe, whether I appraise it as wrong, the answer is yes. And it wouldn't matter who's dead or alive in that universe. So if everybody died in the universe, I would still think it's wrong to torture babies. If there's a universe with no people in it, still wrong to torture babies. That doesn't mean that it's wrong independent of my standards. You have to be clear on who you mean by me or I, like who is being indexed here. So you have this scenario. Would it remain morally wrong if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him? Again, are you indexing it to my standards or the hypothetical version of me? Because it wouldn't be wrong relative to the me in that scenario standards, because there wouldn't be a me in that scenario who has standards. So you have a very serious problem with questions like this. These questions are ambiguous about which standard is being indexed, what they're asking when they say, would it remain morally wrong? And the idea is that if you want to say yes, that it would remain morally wrong, this is supposed to indicate that you think it would be wrong independent of anybody's standards or values. But that is not the only way that you can interpret this question. And it's because of this ambiguity in the question. What someone would have to do is clarify what exactly they're asking, because I do think it would remain wrong relative to my standards, but not the standards of any people in the scenario. So it would remain wrong relative to my standards. So this just doesn't require realism. This is a very weird and confused question. And the people that pose this question seem to be thinking in a somewhat realist-ish sort of way. What they seem to be thinking is that our standards are reified and are like made into moral facts. And so if I'm not around to make a moral fact, then there is no moral fact. And that's not at all what's going on when a person holds something akin to, but not identical to, an appraiser relativist stance. Now, why am I not an appraiser relativist? Because typically, classic metaethical stances are depicted as including a semantic thesis about the meaning of ordinary moral claims. And I don't think that ordinary people speak, think, or act like a moral relativist, whatever that would mean. I don't think that's a correct account of everyday moral language. But when I make moral claims, I'm making claims about my standards. So if you ask me a question about a hypothetical universe where there's nobody that disapproves of baby torture, and there's one person around that's pro baby torture, and you ask me, would baby torture be wrong in that universe? It's a very puzzling question. If you're asking me, would it be wrong relative to the standards of anybody in that universe? The answer is a trivial no, it wouldn't be. And this is something that realists should be perfectly happy to concede, because once we analyze, once we unpack what the relativists' construal of moral claims is, we can get rid of any sort of undisambiguated moral claims, and we could simply replace them with the analysis that the relativist gives. So the relativist would treat all moral claims, like the appraiser relativist anyway, like baby torture is morally wrong, as statements that reflect the standards of the person making that's making the evaluation. And so the statement, it's morally wrong to torture babies, would only be true if the person making that claim, in fact, thinks that. And so if you say, hey, imagine a universe in which there are no people who disapprove of baby torture, the appropriate question would then be, in that universe, would there be anybody that disapproves of baby torture? Now, of course, the answer is a trivial no. But what does that have to do with my moral standards? I'm not obligated to think that baby torture would be acceptable if there were a universe in which there were no people that disapproved of baby torture. Why would I be obligated to think that baby torture would be permissible in that universe? I'm not in that universe. So what the hell kind of question is that? The question itself is just confused. And this is not a good diagnostic procedure for determining whether or not a person is a realist. So a person saying yes to that is completely consistent with that person being an anti-realist. And this isn't merely hypothetical. I say yes to both those questions, and I am the most committed anti-realist I think you're going to find on YouTube. Maybe there's some more. If there are, please let me know about them, because I'd love to talk about them. But this is I got to be honest, this is a bullshit question. It's a bad question. It's a very confused question, and it is not a good way of figuring out whether a person is a realist or not. This is awful. And I really mean, this is genuinely really, really, really bad.
Right, we would have something that's morally wrong when all human opinion says otherwise. So it seems that you do believe in at least one moral truth that holds independently of human opinion, and thus you do believe in objective morality.
Oh, huh.
So that's it in a nutshell. I suspect some folks who give lip service to moral relativism would quickly abandon it once they're given one good example of an objective moral truth like this. If you're talking to a
It's just he hasn't given an example of an objective moral truth.
stubborn moral relativist who's politically very liberal, you can switch it up a bit.
There's nothing you could do to convince me that morality is not relative.
Is it morally wrong for a homophobic bigot to torture a lesbian for her sexual orientation?
Of course it is.
Would it remain morally wrong if the homophobic bigot thought otherwise and killed or brainwashed all who disagreed with him?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is what this
A
is doing.
homophobic
Let's
bigot to
wait till we get
torture a
the whole thing up
lesbian
on
for her
screen.
sexual orientation?
Of course it is.
Would it remain morally wrong?
I mean, this is basically social and emotional blackmail. This is normative entanglement to the extreme. So you say, okay, hey, take a person that has a very strong moral conviction and is very very publicly in favor of that moral conviction, and then say, hey, you're really against this really awful thing. Now, would that awful thing be really bad? Would it still remain bad if some person that thought it was good went ahead and did it, and then they killed everybody that disagreed with them? This is just another instance of the exact same example as before, but now you just swap it out with something that the person is really not going to want to say is like wouldn't be morally wrong under the circumstances. It's just another iteration of the same fundamentally confused question, to where an anti-realist could easily say, yes, absolutely. A person that might say no to this might be some type of agent relativist, where what they would think is something like moral facts are fixed by the standards of the people performing the actions. And so if there were no people in a universe performing a particular action, then the action, there wouldn't be any instances of an individual for which the action is permissible. But even if you wanted to try to ask a question like that, this isn't a very good way to do it. It's too ambiguous. It's too unclear what exactly it's asking. So would it remain morally wrong? So does that mean, again, if you're a relativist, are you asking the relativist, would it be wrong relative to the standards of any of the people in the hypothetical? Because then the answer is obviously no. So in other words, imagine there's a world in which nobody considers something wrong. Would anyone in that world consider something wrong, that thing wrong? No, of course not. So that doesn't mean you have to think it's not wrong. So, again, like, compare this to food preferences. So, if I think statements like pineapple on pizza is delicious mean something like I love pineapple on pizza, and then you say, hey, imagine there is a universe where there are no people that like pineapple on pizza. Would there be any instances in which the statement pineapple on pizza is good is true? No, there wouldn't be. Does that mean in the current universe that you yourself are therefore like you don't like pineapple on pizza? No, of course not. You can still like pineapple on pizza. And it's the same thing in this case, simply because it's possible to conceive of a universe in which there are no people that disapprove of bigotry. That says it has no implications on whether or not you can or should or do disapprove of bigotry, nor does it entail that there are circumstances in which you yourself would have to be okay with bigotry. So just because there's some universe where nobody in the universe disapproves of bigotry, that doesn't mean you outside of that universe or outside of the hypothetical that you somehow aren't allowed to disapprove of the bigotry that would occur in that universe. So there's some kind of like indexing ambiguity here. I mean, it's really really weird. I mean, it's almost like saying, imagine there's a world, or like I'm Lance. So imagine there was a world where someone went around systematically killing everybody named Lance. Would there be anybody named Lance in the world? And if you say no, so there's nobody named Lance. Wait, what? So there's nobody named Lance in this world? Like, what is supposed to be the implication of this? Somehow people seem to be imagining that the relativist thinks that they judge whether an action is right or wrong based on the standards of the people in that universe, or the people performing those actions, or the standards of the individuals or groups that are involved in these scenarios. No, that's agent relativism. But a relativist doesn't have to be an agent relativist. Same damn thing I said in the last video. I got to be honest, what the hell is wrong with critics of relativism where they're not drawing the agent appraiser relativism distinction? Do I need to go over this again? I'll go over it again. Okay. Agent relativism. Whether an action is morally right or wrong is determined by the standards of the agent or the culture of the agent performing the action. And so if there's some agent that thinks baby torture is good, then it's morally good for that person to torture babies or whatever. Or if the cultural version would be, if their culture approves of it, then it's morally good for them to torture babies. Then you have appraiser relativism. Whether an action is right or wrong depends on the standards of the person evaluating the scenario. And so now if you present me a scenario where everyone in the scenario, there's like the only person left is a person that's a baby torturer, and then you ask me, is it wrong? I'm going to judge it as wrong relative to my standards, not the standards of the agents in the scenario. So what the hell kind of question is this? It's a nonsense question. And what's especially troubling about this sort of question is I don't know if there's something self-conscious about this, but this idea of taking something that the person in question, like, what's the person's political views? Well, let me find the thing that they would find the most repugnant, the most heinous, the most objectionable, and then give them a scenario like this so that the person would feel really uncomfortable. Because you have this issue where, and I've talked about normative entanglement before. Let's say I was giving a big public speech and someone said, do you think it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? Or, do you think it's objectively wrong for a bigot to torture people for their sexual orientation? Sorry, again, with the coughing. So someone asked you that question in public, right? Do you think it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? Now, if you're an anti-realist, then the answer to the question, is it objectively wrong to torture people for fun, is no, it's not objectively wrong. But how do you think an audience would interpret that? So imagine I'm up on the podium, right? You got all the cameras in my face as I get CNN and Fox News and all the big, and they're like, do you think it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? And I go, no, it's not objectively wrong. You're going to get gasps of horror, clutching the pearls. People are going to go, oh my God. They're going to think you're saying, yeah, I'm not really against baby torture. Yeah, it's not that bad. The problem is that when you bundle the metaethical question of whether anything is objectively right or wrong, or stands independently right or wrong, with a normative question, think about the 2x2 matrix of the potential positions you could have. You could be a moral realist or a moral anti-realist. You could think the action on normative moral terms is right or it's wrong. If you say, in response to the question, is baby torture objectively wrong? Yes, that puts you in the yes, yes box. Yes, you're a realist. Yes, it's wrong. But what if you say no? That's actually consistent with all three of the other boxes. It could be that you think some things are objectively wrong, but that baby torture isn't among them. Okay, well, that's a pretty horrible position to take, right? That if that's your only view, like that if something is right or wrong, it's right or wrong in an objective sense. Okay, so now you're just not against baby torture. That's bad. You're a bad person. Maybe you think nothing's objectively right or wrong, and on normative moral grounds, like even from an anti-realist perspective, you still don't think baby torture is wrong. Okay, that's bad. You're not anti-baby torture. That's a scary, dangerous person. But what if you think there are no objective moral facts? So it's not objectively wrong, but you do think that it's morally wrong on normative moral grounds. Well, what's so bad about that? I don't think there's anything bad about that. But when you say no to that question, it puts you either in the top box if you're an objectivist who thinks it's wrong, or it puts you ambiguously between one of those three boxes. And ironically, from a Bayesian perspective, if someone says no to that question, you should, from a Bayesian perspective, update in favor of the view that they do not disapprove of baby torture. Because think about it: if they say, hey, do you think it's baby torture is objectively wrong, and they say yes, then they do disapprove of baby torture. Because they're giving you their normative and their metaethical view at the same time. But if they say no, you don't know if it's on metaethical grounds, normative grounds, or both. And so it's possible that it's not on normative grounds that you don't think it's wrong. In fact, there's two examples of that, and only one example of you being against it on normative grounds, but not on metaethical grounds. So this is pretty good evidence that maybe you're not anti-baby torture. And so these sorts of scenarios are, and this is moving in the direction of normative entanglement, are, whether intentional or not, rhetorically incredibly powerful, because they readily give onlookers or audiences the impression that the anti-realist has horrific, awful, normative moral views, even if they don't. And so these sorts of questions are a kind of trap question. They're kind of trick question. And they in this case, and again, I'm not saying this is intentional, but they exploit ambiguity and a lack of specification to give the misleading impression that if you don't say what you're expected to say in response to this, that you have some kind of awful, terrible view. Because like, what if you said, would it remain morally wrong, blah, 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 in that scenario, and you said no? What are the implications of that if you're a relativist? Well, they're pretty similar potentially to the implications of, if you're an appraiser relativist and you're asked, hey, if a person disapproves of torture, then if they say, if a person approves of torture and that person says torture is good, is the statement true? For an appraiser relativist, the answer is yes. And someone could go, oh, the shock and horror. You're saying that the statement torture is good or torture is permissible is sometimes true. Yeah, it is sometimes true. Now, unpack the statement. what is the relativist committed to when they say that? What the relativist is committed to is that when a person says torture is morally permissible, they're saying I approve of torture. Now, if the person saying I approve of torture approves of torture, isn't that statement true? Yes, it is. It's trivially true. So if a person that is pro-torture says, I'm pro-torture, of course that's true. And so the analysis that the appraiser relative is giving is that's just what moral claims mean. They're just descriptions of or self-reports of our values. Now, that has nothing to do with whether you have to approve of torture. And just the same, if a person is resolving this ambiguity by thinking about the semantics of the people in those scenarios, like the language of the speakers in this hypothetical world, when the people in this hypothetical world say bigotry is permissible or whatever, what they mean is we approve of bigotry. And so if you have a world of all bigots and then they go around saying bigotry is good, if your analysis of what the meaning of moral claims is that they express the speaker's values, then these people are saying true statements. But so that amounts to a bunch of people that are pro-bigotry saying we're pro-bigotry, we're pro-bigotry. That has nothing to do with whether you, the person looking at the scenario, have to be pro-bigotry. I think I made this point in 15 different ways. These are terrible questions. These are really, really, really bad. Let me have a look at the chat. Yeah, okay, people here are agreeing. So Arbitrary says this guy's really bad. This is bad. Mason Covert says this is painful. Coffee Smug says Lance might explode. I might. This stuff really bugs me. Why can't objections to my views be good? Why does it have to be this, where I just have to deal with ambiguity and bad objections and really, really misleading ways of framing things? Question Quander. No, Lance, it's not a nonsense question. It's a question phrased to intentionally deceive and poison the well. It's a rhetorical tactic to win debates and benefit from mimetic aspects of doing so. See, that's the thing I'm not willing to do. I don't know, because you're saying it's phrased intentionally to deceive. I don't know what his goals are. Why would I think he's intentionally trying to deceive? What's that phrase? Don't attribute to malice, whatever. Like, what I would just say to attribute to misunderstanding. I'd rather attribute this to not understanding relativism and not understanding why this is a bad question. And Matthew Adelstein, the person that runs the Bintham's newsletter, Bintham's Bulldog or whatever, he thought that this was a good question, or something like this was a good question to pose to people as a way of figuring out if they're a realist or not. And I was trying to explain, this is an awful question to ask people because of this ambiguity. So this is no good. All right, let's keep going.
If the homophobic bigot thought otherwise and killed or brainwashed all who disagreed with him.
No?
Well, I, as a Christian, believe such homophobic bigotry would be highly unethical, whereas you apparently disagree?
Oh man, I might need to rethink this.
Part 2.
Yeah, so I mean, we've got this cartoon caricature of an idiot relativist. What can I say about that?
The deductive argument. When structured as a deductive argument, the argument for moral objectivism becomes this. Premise 1. It is morally wrong for a man to torture an infant just for fun. Note that this premise doesn't take a position whether the moral wrongness is objective or subjective.
Yeah, notice it's ambiguous as hell. That's consistent with every anti-realist view out there. It's even consistent with error theory, because the error theorist could be a fictionalist. Although there is the question of whether they're a fictionalist. Like, are we speaking in a theoretical context or an everyday language context? If we're speaking in a theoretical context, maybe an error theorist would say, well, yeah, they would just say that it's false. So that might not be an issue. But it's consistent with most anti-realist views to say yes to this. They're expressivist, quasi-realist, some kind of constructivist, some type of appraiser relativist, some type of agent relativist, a Humean constructivist, my view, like a quietist. So there's a bunch of views where this would be, it'd be difficult to like locate a view where it wouldn't be consistent with it. Like some fairly rigid type of error theory, I guess, is about it.
It just says it's morally wrong. So if the moral wrongness is subjective, then this premise is true. And if the moral wrongness is objective, then the premise is true. Because again, it doesn't take a position on whether the moral wrongness is objective. Premise 2. It would remain morally wrong for a man to torture an infant just for fun, even if a baby torturer thought otherwise and
Yeah, I don't know why he's doing this. He's giving like 50 versions of the same argument.
killed everyone who disagreed with him. Premise 3. If premises 1 and 2 are true, then objective exists.
Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty straightforward. We just reject the third premise. Easy peasy.
Conclusion, therefore, objective
next?
morality exists. The argument is logically valid. In logic, an argument being valid means a conclusion.
This is a really weird thing to do, to praise your argument for being logically valid. Like, This is a bit like saying, hey, my argument, like the sentences in which my argument is conveyed, are grammatical. Like logic is just the grammar of argumentation. To praise your arguments for being valid, like validity is like the minimum standard. Who gives a shit if it's valid? Like, of course it's got to be valid.
Follows necessarily from the premises by the rules of logic.
But by the way, when I say who gives a shit, I'm not saying like who cares if it's valid or not. What I'm saying is like, of course you you have to present valid arguments. What the hell? It's so weird when people do this. It's something that William Lane Craig does, and he's like, and the argument is logically valid, as if that somehow makes it a better argument. No, that's the bare minimum. It's like saying, and the sentence that I'm speaking is intelligible, and I'm not just speaking gibberish. I'm not just going, like that it's valid, as if that's some sort of like, oh shit, valid argument. I mean, this is a valid argument. If bananas exist, moral anti-realism is true. Bananas exist, so moral anti-realism is true. Oh no, it's a modus ponens. It's a valid argument. If the premises are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. Valid argument. It's very silly to put in an argument as valid.
Such that you can't have true premises and a false conclusion. A sound argument is one that is logically valid and has all true premises. The general idea for justifying premise 3 is to assume the first two premises for the sake of argument and see if that would lead to moral objectivism. So the justification for 3, which says if the first two premises are true, then objective morality exists, goes like this. In the scenario depicted in 2, it remains morally wrong for a man to torture infants just for fun, even though all human opinion thinks otherwise, since the torturer killed off everyone who disagrees with him.
Right, but again, you have the indexing ambiguity. So in the scenario, it remains morally wrong for a man to torture infants just for fun, even though all human opinion thinks otherwise. So when you say it remains morally wrong, do you mean it stands independently wrong, or do you mean that it can be wrong relative to the standards of an appraiser evaluating this hypothetical scenario from outside of it? Those are both consistent with this. And so this does not this does not appear to give us an answer that's only consistent with realism. And so it doesn't entail that realism is true. So it doesn't entail that, his way of phrasing it is objective morality exists. This argument does not work.
Thus, the moral truth it's morally wrong for a man to torture infants just for fun would be holding despite human opinion. Thus, we would seem to have an example of an...
Right. So look at the move from A to B. Even though all human opinion thinks otherwise. Okay, all human opinion in the scenario or outside the scenario? Because if you tell me there's a scenario where a person kills everybody that disagrees with them, it doesn't follow that they killed me, right? Like I'm not dead. So why can't I judge a scenario? The fact is I can, and I am judging it. Yep. Yeah. So what is it? Baby torture? Why is it always baby torture? Yeah, still wrong. Still wrong relative to my standards. So weird. How is this not obvious? What I don't understand is how this isn't obvious. Like this is the obvious relativist response. And I think he's going to go on to give some caricature, like as if relativists are just total idiots and couldn't possibly come up with a decent response to this. No, we don't have an example of an objective moral truth. This is just a goofy question.
But objective moral truth, that is holding true independently of human opinion, thereby giving us objective morality. Since the first two premises lead to A, B, and C being true here, premise 3 is pretty solid. The real areas of vulnerability are the first two premises, but denying either one means biting a big bullet. You could deny premise 1, but is it reasonable to believe that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for...
Well, it depends what you mean by that. You'd have to disambiguate it. So, let's give my analysis. It is morally wrong for a man to torture an infant just for fun. Okay, so I interpret that as the me in this world, I disapprove of people torturing infants just for fun. I would continue to disapprove of people torturing infants just for fun, even if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him. So again, we would have to resolve the ambiguity of whether by everyone he means me disapproving or me not disapproving. Now, let's suppose he does mean me. In that case, then would it remain morally wrong? It's a very weird question. It would be asking, would I disapprove of baby torture if I were killed and thus no longer what existed and therefore couldn't disapprove of baby torture? No. Okay. Does that entail that realism is true? No, it does not. All it would mean is I'm dead, and so I'm not able to have a stance on the matter. So let's say I say it would remain wrong. Because I'm still capable of having a standard on it. Then my answer is yes, it's still wrong. It's wrong relative to my standard. So you see, whether you say yes or no to this, this does not get you to realism. This second premise is not doing the work that he wants it to do. And it's very clear why it's not doing the work that he wants it to do. So again, So it would remain morally wrong. So again, consider the appraiser relativist analysis. I would continue to disapprove of it. So I would continue to disapprove. So again, let's walk through the premise again. I disapprove of a man torturing an infant just for fun. Yep, I agree with that. I disapprove. I would continue to, or I would remain disapproving of a man torturing an infant just for fun, even if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with them. Now, the question here is, who is everyone? Is everyone in the hypothetical, excluding me? If the answer to that is yes, then I still exist, and I still exist and can therefore disapprove of it. So in other words, would I continue to disapprove of torture of babies in a hypothetical universe in which everybody else was dead, other than the baby torturer and some babies, I guess? Yeah, I'd still disapprove of it. If the answer is no, I'm supposed to imagine my perspective in the universe, or we could say, imagine it's this universe and I am dead. Okay, then I don't exist to disapprove of it, in which case the answer is no. So you can either reject the second premise, like you could just say it's false that it would remain morally wrong. Not a problem. There's nothing especially implausible about that. Or you could say yes, but that doesn't entail 3, and then you would reject 3. So here, it's pretty easy to reject either 2 or 3. You could also reject 1 if someone's going to insist by wrong that they mean like something that presupposes realism. So there's going to be an easy way, once you disambiguate these premises, to always reject at least one of them. So there is no problem here for an anti-realist, including relativists, much less other realists, or sorry, other anti-realists. Because like an error theorist is just going to say the first premise is false. What else? Expressivists, I don't know how they would answer this question. I like they probably answer it in a similar way to how I'm answering it. Then a relativist has no problem with this.
For fun, you could bite the bullet and deny premise 2. Say it's not morally wrong for a man to torture.
Yeah, see, like, why is that biting the bullet? The analysis I gave is trivially true. So the question would be, would I continue to disapprove of baby torture if someone killed me? No, because I'm dead. How come I'm not disapproving of shit? And if someone said, but what about the afterlife? Fine, then I disapprove of it as a ghost. Then I would just say yes. But it's still, so in other words, you got a dilemma here. Either the answer is yes, but it doesn't entail realism, so reject the third premise, or the answer is no, but I don't consider that biting a bullet. What's the bullet that I'm biting? Like on that disambiguation, this is trivially true. But people always say this. They say that, rejecting this view is bullet biting. What's the bullet that's being bit? What's the problem with saying no to this question? Is it that it sounds bad? Because I'm not intimidated by that. So, realists rely on a lot of arguments that try to make anti-realism sound bad. And anti-realists need to start pushing back against this because it's straight baloney. There's just this perpetual attempt to imply and insinuate and give the impression that anti-realists are like not against baby torture. I cannot make this any more clear to Maverick Christian. I am more anti-baby torture than I think he probably is. I'm more anti-baby torture than I don't think I could get more anti-baby torture. So if God of the Christian Bible came down and said, torture some babies, I would say, fuck you, God. I'm not torturing any damn babies. Go to hell. So I'm anti-baby torture. I don't give a shit if someone goes around killing people, torturing babies. If I'm the last person standing, I'm still anti-baby torture. The only way I stop being anti-baby torture is if you kill me or like alter my brain chemistry or something. That's how anti-baby torture I am. And I'm a moral anti-realist. So they give the impression that the false and misleading impression. I shouldn't just say impression. Here, this type of argument is intended, I shouldn't say intended. This type of argument functions, whether it's intended or not, to give the false and the misleading impression that anti-realists are like less opposed to baby torture than realists. It's straight bullshit. That's not true. And this is a super, super duper misleading way to argue. And I really want realists to start recognizing just how terrible this argument is. And you see people in my chat here saying, this has got to be intentional. This has got to be intentional. I'm not convinced that it is. I think, I don't know what's going on here. I could speculate, but I don't know what's going on with realists, why they use crappy arguments. But what I will say is the argument is crap. This is straight crap. All three of the arguments are just a version of the same thing. I've been at this for 40 minutes and it's just the same argument over and over. So let's keep going and we'll get to some other content.
If it's just for fun, as long as he believes otherwise and kills everyone who disagrees with him. Do you think that's a reasonable belief? I think this argument is strong because none of the premises seem reasonable to deny. Consider premise 1, for example. It's not reasonable to believe that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun.
Why? What does it mean to say that it's not, doesn't it depend on what you mean?
As a disclaimer, moral nihilists, people who don't believe anything's morally wrong, not even torturing infants just for fun, aren't necessarily bad people. They can be very nice people who are just as opposed to the torture of infants as much as the next person. It's just that if they were consistent with their belief, they would have to think that their intense dislike of such torture is just a matter of taste and there's nothing really wrong with it. Because the moment they do think people shouldn't torture infants, they're believing in morality. So the problem is not that moral nihilists are bad people. They can be very nice people. The problem is that moral nihilism is not a reasonable belief.
Why is it not reasonable? Why? He just declares that it's not reasonable. Did he have any arguments in there? Let's go back. Let's see.
I think this argument is strong because none of the premises torturing infants just for fun aren't necessarily bad people. They can be very nice people who are just as opposed to the torture of infants as much as the next person. It's just that if they were consistent with their belief, they would have to think that their intense dislike of such torture is just a matter of taste and there's nothing really wrong with it. Because the moment they do,
they think it's just a matter of taste and there's nothing really wrong with it. There's nothing objectively wrong with it. So what? Why is that implausible? So I think my moral standards are a matter of taste, and I don't think anything is like, if by really wrong you mean objectively wrong, I don't think anything's objectively wrong. So what? What's so implausible about that?
do think people shouldn't torture infants, they're believing in morality. So the problem is not that moral nihilists are bad people. They can be very nice people. The problem is that moral nihilism is not a reasonable belief.
Why is it not reasonable?
It is
Let's
not
see.
reasonable to believe that there's nothing wrong with torturing infants just for fun. By my life,
Why? Why? What's the implication of that? If my attitudes are the same, my preferences are the same, my values are the same, I go out and stop people from torturing babies. The only thing I don't think, if you're a nihilist, because he's not even being clear what a nihilist is. What the hell does that even mean? If you're an error theorist, you would just think something like, look, like technically, there's nothing, because what morality is about is this objective stuff, and there's nothing like that. Technically, nothing's morally right or wrong. It has no implications for your conduct or behavior. So what's so implausible about that? What's implausible? I'd love to hear what's implausible about that.
it's a big problem with those who would reject.
By the way, no, the people that say that it's implausible, won't tell you why sometimes, or don't explicitly say why. It's supposed to be this floating implication. Obviously, it's wrong. It's not obviously wrong. I don't think it's obviously wrong to say nothing is morally wrong. Absolutely nothing. Nothing's morally wrong. And, oh, so you're saying there's nothing wrong with torturing babies for fun? Well, what the hell do you mean by that? If by that you mean it's objectively wrong, yeah, I don't think it's objectively wrong. Does it mean I'm any less anti-baby torture than you? Nope. Has no practical implications at all. I'm just not buying into people's views about language and metaphysics. It has no practical implications at all.
The conclusion is that neither the first premise nor the second premise is reasonable to deny. In a logically valid argument,
Well, I deny the second premise, or at least I think it's ambiguous. And so there's a serious problem with this, but I think it's certainly possible to deny it, and there wouldn't be anything implausible about doing so. So I don't see a problem with denying the first premise. I don't see a problem with denying the second premise. And I certainly don't see a problem with denying the third premise. So, I mean, this argument fails in every possible respect. Like, none of the premises are good.
two premises constitute evidence for the conclusion. So if we know that all the premises are true, we have extremely solid evidence for moral objectivism. As of this recording, when I presented this argument against skeptics of objective morality, here's the most common response I get.
Evidence against my position? Avert thy gaze.
That's a comedic exaggeration.
I literally didn't understand what that character said. What did he say? Someone in the chat, can you tell me what the character's saying? Maybe I just have bad hearing.
When I presented this argument against skeptics of objective morality, here's the most common response I get.
Evidence against my position?
Evidence against my position.
Avert thy gaze.
Avert thy gaze. Okay. Okay, yeah. Is my gaze averted?
That's a comedic exaggeration, but it's not that far from the truth. And in a way, this is kind of understandable. For a person who denies moral objectivism, think of the position they're in. Again, the truth of these premises is being offered as evidence for the conclusion. When faced with evidence for a position, there are several types of rebuttals one can give. One could deny that the evidence supports the conclusion. That doesn't work in this case because the argument for moral objectivism is logically valid. The rules of logic make it impossible to have two premises and a false conclusion here. One could dispute the evidence and say that a premise is false. But the problem is that none of the premises seem reasonable to deny. Which brings me to the third strategy of
Well, I beg to differ.
dealing with the evidence. One could ignore the evidence. Don't say anything that addresses the truth of a premise. The most common response I've received as of this recording is to not address the premises. But the conclusion is false. There, of course, needs to be a false premise. By ignoring the premises, one ignores the proffered evidence for the conclusion. Which brings me to red herrings. A red herring.
Yeah, so what I will note is you have a problem with arguments that are like What we would have to do is like formalize that argument. It would be pretty easy to make it logically valid, but we would have to really be clear on what the content of the premises actually was. And that would require disambiguation. And if the premises are not disambiguated, then in many cases you're going to have like indeterminate truth status for one or more premises, as long as they remain ambiguous. And then you can't assign a true or false value to them until they're disambiguated. Then I can tell you whether they're true or false. And what I would say about the argument presented there is, if you disambiguated it, it's going to be fairly easy for me to deny at least one of the premises.
Herring is something that misleads or distracts, and a red herring fallacy or ignoratio elenchi is where someone supposes a point proved or refuted by establishing something not at issue. One way to ignore the evidence for moral objectivism here is to use red herrings instead of attacking the premises. Some examples of red herring responses to the reality have changed over time, that there are moral disagreements among different people, that everyone agreeing on something doesn't make it objectively true, that the God of the Old Testament did terrible things.
I got to say, I agree with him about this. A lot of people, when they're confronted with like arguments for realism or whatever, do engage in this sort of distraction bullshit where they say I've seen all these sorts of things from anti-realists, and it's really embarrassing and awful when they do it. So kudos to him for pointing this out. I think it's perfectly fine. I think he's right that people do this kind of stuff.
All of these are red herrings. Remember that this argument
he's going through
that there are moral disagreements among different people, that everyone agreeing on something.
Humanity's beliefs and morality have changed over time. So this is something people will say. Like, if you're like, here's a case of realism, they'll go, but people's moral values have changed. So who gives a shit? So some people used to torture people. So it's, so therefore morality can't be objective. What the hell does that have to do with objective morality? This is nothing. It has very little to do with it, at least not directly. There are moral disagreements among different people. So you could leverage that into an argument for moral anti-realism. I don't think those arguments are particularly good. Everyone agreeing on something doesn't make it objectively true. That's true, but also irrelevant.
Thing doesn't make it objectively true. That the God of the Old Testament.
Yeah, so the God of the Old Testament did terrible things. Given the description, if the God of the Old Testament existed and did the things described there, I would agree it did terrible things. But again, irrelevant to metaethical questions.
Testament did terrible things.
I mean, again, arguably you could try to work that into some legitimate argument, but on its own, it's not a great argument. It's not even clear what the argument is. It's just like, hey, I don't like what you said, so I'm going to say some other thing and try to shift the focus of the argument.
All of these are red herrings.
There have always been people for whom killing and torturing babies was fine. Yeah, also irrelevant.
Remember that this argument is logically valid. True premise.
Yeah, remember that that's a very trivial thing to point out. Sure.
This is guaranteed the conclusion's truth by the rules of logic. Because this argument is logically valid, the only way this argument can fail to be sound is with a false premise. When considering an objection to a logically valid argument, ask yourself, does the response attack any premise of the argument? Consider, for example, the objection that moral disagreements exist. That's true, but does this give us any reason to doubt any premise of the argument? Does the existence of moral disagreements give us any good reason to doubt premise 1, for example? Obviously not. This response is a red herring. Even if the response were true, it gives us no rational grounds for doubting the soundness of the argument. A big clue that these objections are red herrings is that even if they're true, they don't do anything to attack the truth or justification of any premise. And if the premises of a logically valid argument are justifiably true, the conclusion is correct regardless of what else might be true, such as the magic of logic. Remember, the fact that the premises are true is evidence for the conclusion. So by ignoring the premises, one is ignoring the evidence for objective morality here. So don't be fooled by red herrings that distract from whether the premises are true. Because such red herrings are a way of employing tactic 3 here, they're a way of avoiding the evidence by virtue of talking about something else instead. But one can't refute the evidence for objective morality by evading it with red herring responses. One can also be evasive of the asking questions approach. One time, I conversed with someone who didn't accept moral objectivism and asked her if she believed that there was something morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun. She said yes. I then asked her if it would remain wrong if a baby tortured thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him. Silence. I suspect what happened was she thought about it and realized that if she said yes, she'd be committing herself to moral objectivism. Long story short, she never got around to answering the question. That said, there are going to be some people who are willing to deny one of the premises and bite one of the bullets I mentioned, like believing there's nothing morally wrong.
Well, I deny. Not only do I deny, depending on how you disambiguate at least one of the premises, I also deny that doing so involves biting any bullets. So, I just don't accept other people engaging in a dialectical framing in which my denial of one of their premises is some kind of cost. I also deny that. I'm not obligated to accept that. And it's, again, another one of those things that anti-realists, and then people look, if you're going into philosophy as a student, you got to be mindful of people saying, you could do that, but you're biting the bullet. Ask them to clarify. What does that mean? Like, I deny that there's any such thing as qualia or phenomenal consciousness. Oh, you're biting the bullet on that? No, I'm not. because I think the idea of quality of phenomenal consciousness is fucking silly. So why would I say I'm biting a bullet on that? I don't believe in crystal magic. I don't believe in homeopathy. Am I biting the bullet and denying those? No. So I am tired of people that have a certain position that present their position as being some sort of dominant default position against which anybody that holds some skeptical or rival position, that they're under the thumb of that position, and like you're allowed to reject it, but only if you acknowledge that you're paying a cost. Bullshit. I'm not paying cost to deny your nonsense views. It's ridiculous. I'm tired of people framing things this way. I'm tired of other people just passively accepting that framing. So, you can reject the view, but you're biting a bullet. Bullshit. People need to stop. They need to call this out because philosophers have habituated people to this. I'm so deeply sick of philosophers saying stuff like it's intuitive that. What the hell? It's tasty that. It's tasty that cheeseburgers. Why not say that? That's nonsense. Cheeseburgers can be tasty to some people and taste like ass to other people. You don't just, you shouldn't just go around saying something is the case when it's the sort of thing that calls for indexing or qualification. It's intuitive to me. It's intuitive to reasonable people. It's intuitive to people I like. Just be clear about who the hell you're talking about. And if you want to say it's intuitive to everybody, it's intuitive to all people that are rational or have functional rational faculties, fine. Operationalize functional rational faculties and present some damn empirical evidence that that's intuitive in that respect. But it's the same thing, like he earlier saying that these premises weren't plausible or something. And someone, put it up here, Ben Singleton, implausible means no truth tingles. Well, I get truth tingles when I reject those premises. So apparently my truth tingles go in the opposite direction. So now what? Maybe we shouldn't trust truth tingles for these sorts of things. Sorry, if you don't have the context for this, I posted about this, I don't know, a week or two ago, where it said, we should replace uses of philosophers saying things are intuitive with saying that they have truth tingles. So, a philosopher could say, when I consider baby torture, I have the truth tingle that it stands independently wrong, or, whatever it would be. You substitute out saying it's intuitive or plausible with truth tingles. And then I said, let's see how seriously people take philosophers at that point. Because if they had to go around saying, well, I think this is true because I get truth tingles when I think about it, I think a lot of people would scoff at that. But that's basically what intuitions are. They're truth tingles. And, if they're even a thing at all. And apparently people have truth tingles. And I think that there's no particular reason to take them very seriously.
Wrong with torturing infants just for fun.
Well, that's insane. Why would anybody do something like that?
A lot of atheists recognize on some level that objective morality is problematic on atheism, and so they deny objective morality.
Wait, what? A lot of them recognize this. What's the problem with... Look, I'm no fan of moral realism, but it doesn't have any specific or particular problems with atheism. The two play they play nicely together just fine. There's no issue there.
Even if that denial leads to absurdities. I kind of went into that in vlog episode 3 about why that happens. Another point of evasion I've noticed is in answering follow-up questions. For example, suppose someone denies premise 1. I ask the follow-up question. Do you think it's reasonable to believe there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun? And for denying premise 2. You could deny premise 2, say it's not morally wrong for a man to torture infants just for fun as long as he believes otherwise and kills everyone who disagrees with him. Do you think that's a reasonable belief? As of this recording, what usually happens in my experience is that they dodge the question. My suspicion is that for a lot of these people, there's a part of them that knows that their belief is not reasonable, but they don't want to confront the fact that...
Yeah, well, maybe you're just asking confusing, weird, and ambiguous questions and people don't know how to handle them. So maybe that's the issue.
Their belief is unreasonable, so they don't answer the question. I've posted this C.S. Lewis quote before where he seems to think that even among those who say they don't believe in morality, on some level they really do believe.
Okay, let's have a look at this. From C.S. Lewis. I've never been impressed with a single thing C.S. Lewis has said, ever. I don't understand the love that people have for Lewis because most of what he says seems like naive platitudes and pretty goofy and unimpressive insights that are presented as if they're deep and really profound. Okay, let's see. And I said all that having not read this. He may have read it because I listened to the video earlier. Maybe I heard this before, but whatever. Let's read it. A moment after they have admitted that good and evil are illusions, you will find them exhorting us to work for posterity, to educate, revolutionize, liquidate, live and die for the good of the human race. For they write with indignation like men proclaiming what is good in itself and denouncing what is evil in itself, and not... See, this is the nonsense that comes in. For they write with indignation like men proclaiming what is good in itself and denouncing what is evil in itself. Bullshit, C.S. Lewis. You're wrong. So when people say nothing is objectively or stands independently good or evil. And then I go around and then, they go around saying, let's work for posterity, let's educate, let's revolutionize, let's liquidate, let's live and die for the good of the human race. When people do that, they're living like they think that those things are good or bad or evil and not evil, permissible and impermissible. Nothing about acting on your normative standards thinks that it requires you to think that they're good in itself or that it's bad in itself. I could think it's good, but not in itself. I could think it's bad, but not in itself. So, imagine this. Imagine we swap out the moment after a person denies gastronomic realism, the view that there are stance independent facts about what's tasty or not tasty, independent of your taste preferences. The moment the person denies that anything is gastronomically good or bad in the realist sense, stance independently gastronomically good or bad. Sorry, let me start over. The moment someone denies that anything is stance independently good or bad from a taste perspective, you will find that person eating pizza and eating pasta and drinking beer and having nachos and writing Yelp reviews. For they write with indignation, like men proclaiming that food is stance independently tasty or stance independently gross. No, they don't. They're writing like it's tasty or like it's gross. Where is the good? Where's the in itself coming from? He's just added this on. For some reason, realists seem to think that if you're an anti-realist, that you just wouldn't have attitudes or opinions. But the anti-realist perspective, or most of the anti-realist perspectives out there, are perspectives on the nature of the attitudes, preferences, and views that you have towards things. They're not the denial that you have them or would have any reason to have them. It's complete nonsense. I'm not a realist about food. Does that mean I don't think food tastes good or bad? Of course not. Some food tastes straight nasty. I don't want to eat it. I don't have to think it's objectively nasty. It's nasty relative to my standards. And you could think the same thing for morality. You could revolutionize and educate and all this other stuff. That does not mean you're acting like it's good in itself. You're just acting like it's good. You're acting like you prefer it or you disprefer it. What the hell is the issue here? So imagine a person strongly prefers that people don't torture and they strongly prefer donating to charity. What would you expect them to do? To stop torturers or whatever? What did I just say? Person strongly prefers that people don't torture and they strongly prefer donating to charity. What do you predict the person does? I predict they try to stop torture and they donate to charity. What about a person that thinks that it's intrinsically good to stop torture and intrinsically good to donate to charity? Maybe you'd expect them to try to stop torture, donate to charity. They're going to do the same damn thing. So nothing about the outward indication of the behavior in any way implies that the person is a realist about the matter in question. So, okay, let's finish the quote. And not at all like men recording that they personally like mild beer, but some people prefer bitter. Yeah, so this is the same thing that I covered in the last video. Look, I'm just going to say it. This is a stupid and ignorant remark from C.S. Lewis. It's stupid and ignorant. It's not just a bad argument. This is a person that's not thinking well, okay? Here's why, and I covered this in the last video. If a person construes their moral standards as preferences, that does not tell you anything about the strength or the scope of the preference. So let's see, mild beer over bitter beer. I like both. So so I like let me pick a beer. I like wheat beers. I like them more than IPAs. Okay, so that's a particularly mild preference. If you serve me an IPA, I don't hate them. I'll drink it. It's perfectly fine. Some of them I like. So I don't really have a strong preference there, and I don't really care what beer you like or if you don't like beer. So if you want to drink, I don't know, a stout or whatever. I don't know enough about beer. If you want to drink some other kind of beer, I don't care. I don't care what. So I don't have a preference about your beer preferences. I just care about my own, which beer I'm drinking, right? Now, when it comes to baby torture, it's not simply that I have a preference to not torture babies. I have a preference that babies not get tortured by anyone, anywhere, for any reason. So I'm just against baby torture. You see, the difference between the two isn't that one's a preference and one's not a preference. They're both preferences. It's that one preference concerns my conduct. One preference concerns everybody's conduct. It's a difference in scope, not a difference where I'm a realist about one and an anti-realist about another. And, okay, my preference for different types of beers. If you ask me to rate, how important is that preference to me? How bad would I feel? How much would I object if you gave me an IPA instead of like a Blue Moon or something like that? Not that much, whatever. That's fine. But if you said, okay, well, instead of us, giving vaccines to all the babies and curing them or something, we're going to torture them all. Okay, no, don't do that. I very much prefer you not do that. Like that's a case of like violent intervention is warranted to stop people from doing that, right? So again, 3 types of difference. The difference in terms of their metanormative status, realist or anti-realist. I'm an anti-realist about both. But in terms of the scope of the preference, one of them, the scope is everybody. The other is the scope is just myself. And then importance to me, one, not particularly important, one, super duper important. And so what Lewis is doing here is he appears to be conflating an anti-realist perspective with the strength of one's convictions, how strong you have the preference, and with the scope of the preference. So this is just C.S. Lewis being a big dum-dum. This is really profoundly unimpressive. And this happens all the time with realists. They just mix these 3 things up. And look, I've explained it. So now if realists are watching the video, are they going to hear this, hear me point out the distinction and go, oh shit, Lance is right. I was being a total idiot about this. Obviously, you can be an anti-realist and have a very strong preference that applies to everybody. So I guess I'm wrong. And they'll just stop making these stupid rhetorical points. Nope. They're just going to keep doing it. And they're just going to do it and do it and do it and do it. And it's a never ending avalanche. Part of the reason I'm saying this is because I had a blog post come out a few days ago where with people talking about how, anti-realists are psychopaths. I had one before that a few weeks ago talking about how all relativists are evil. Honestly, I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of this. It's not just that, if you don't understand a position to the point where you go around saying here it's wrong and you give a bunch of bad arguments, that's one thing. When you give a bunch of bad arguments where you're constantly insinuating that I, as an anti-realist, am insincere and I don't really believe what I say that I believe, I'm living in a state of perpetual cognitive dissonance. That's really patronizing. It's really patronizing. And I don't like that. I was about to spew even more profanity. That's patronizing. But when you imply either I'm in a state of cognitive dissonance and you're patronizing to me, or I'm an evil psychopath, ooh, that's not good. So if you're going to get my views wrong, that's one thing. If you're going to get my views wrong and imply that I'm an evil piece of shit, you better have some damn good arguments and you better accurately represent my position, because it's really messed up to go around constantly implying or even outright saying that we are evil pieces of garbage. I am sick of this. It's downright unethical to be so damn negligent and present such crappy arguments that you don't just say that another view is wrong, but that the people that hold the view are bad people. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. And, for the people in the audience, like, I'm serious about this. I'm really tired of this. I'm tired of constantly reading. I wake up in the morning and I want to have people have challenge my perspective on the matter. And then what I'm dealing with are like grade school level, just absolute nonsense. If you think that you're a meanie poopy head, I mean, this is the level of the objections that I routinely see against anti-realism, even when it's from people that have degrees or should know better. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. And I have people send me textbooks that have just absolute caricatures of anti-realist positions, relativism, error theory, all of them. Textbooks. So publishers are putting this crap out and they're teaching it to students. I am sick of it. I'm sick of this crap. I'm sick of it. You think this is like, you might think this is fun for me because this is a hobby. I'm not getting paid to do this. I do this, it's a 10 p.m. I've been doing this for 2.5 hours, critiquing this kind of stuff. And you might think, oh, Lance has fun doing this. No, this is not a performance. I'm actually pissed off about this. I'm tired of having my views misrepresented. The thing, besides that, I'm just tired of not having a freaking challenge. Why is it always pointing out nonsense like this? Oh, look, C.S. Lewis said it. I don't care. I don't care if Jesus said it. If it's stupid, it's stupid. And this is stupid. This is stupid. So, like, I'm not dealing with something where, like, I disagree. And here's my respectful philosophical disagreement. What I'm dealing with is someone that's just making a mistake. They're just mixing things up. They're just saying silly and indefensible stuff. Why do I have to keep dealing with this? I'm tired of it. How have professional philosophers not cleaned up their act? Why haven't they criticized the textbooks for including this crap in it? Why aren't people on Twitter or YouTube pointing out the normative entanglement, pointing out the constant browbeating and borderline bullying behavior that realists engage in towards anti-realists, constantly implying we're cool with baby torture and oh, you guys aren't even anti-Hitler, and just absolute freaking nonsense. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. And people need to start not just objecting, but saying, look, not only is what you're doing wrong, you're either super negligent in your critiques or you're being malicious. I don't know what it is, but there's something very wrong about the way anti-realism is treated. The constant insinuations were evil. I'm done with it. I'm done with it. I'm so sick of it. Jesus freaking Christ. I mean, how many freaking articles do I need to write? And I just hit 700 subscribers on my channel, and then meanwhile, that video with the what's the guy's name, Henry, gets like 1.4 million views. Why? Why? How do I get these ideas out there? How do I get these critiques, these of these terrible realist arguments out there, so that people could start seeing just how terrible and hollow and bankrupt these objections are? I don't know how to get them out there because this is the only thing I do. I'm not talking about politics on my channel. I'm not doing videos on whatever, if I did some video on Mary's room, I'm going to get twice as many views. If I do a review of Ben Shapiro, I'll get 10 times as many views. If I talk about Jordan Peterson, I'm going to get a whole bunch of views. I don't want to do that shit. I don't want to sell out and do a bunch of videos about pop culture bullshit that I don't care about and doesn't interest me and I don't have any well-informed opinion on. This is what I know. And this is what I want to talk about. And I'm not getting views for it. And it's pissing me off, not because I feel like I'm entitled to views, but because I want people to stop saying this shit. So look, if I can inspire one of you and you go make videos and you have a successful channel, great. I'll retire from doing this and I'll go switch gears and I'll talk about something else. Because I'd really like to talk about, baking. I'd like to talk about like cakes and pies and stuff like that. I'd love to do a channel on that. But I'm not going to give this up because this stuff pisses me off, and it pisses me off that no one else is doing anything about it. So I'm going to keep doing it until someone takes over and does a better job. Someone that, I don't know, that looks better than me and has a better lighting conditions and doesn't have a shitty microphone that keeps popping and peaking, whatever the hell that means. If someone's better at this than me, can you please take over so that I could go do something else? Because right now I could be doing some work. I could be, I don't even know. I don't even know what I would do. I don't even know. Sleeping? Maybe I'll go to sleep. Maybe I'll watch, I started watching Severance. Maybe I'll watch some more Severance. I don't know. I'd be doing something other than this. So, I remember I had students in a class and I told them, like what motivates you? I don't know what the context was, or I was asking them like what pumps them up, what gets them motivated. But when I was answering for myself, I said, you know what motivates me? Anger. I wake up in the morning, something pisses me off. That's what fires me up, gets me out of bed. So I'm motivated by anger about all these. So I don't know why I decided to get so pissed off about this particular video. I mean, it's pretty repetitive. I could have made a 10-minute response to this where I'm like, yeah, you could just reject the second premise of the argument. Done. And then just moved on. And then all three of those were the same thing. And then I could have said, hey, this quote, mixing up metanormative considerations with strength and scope of preferences. Done. I could do it real concise, but oh man, do I repeat myself too much? But I got to do some recorded videos where I do this more concisely. Let me have a look at the chat. Let's see. All right, people joking. Ben Singleton says the qualia tax. What is the qualia tax? Coffee says, I don't think Lance likes Maverick's argument. All right. People talking about various sorts of things in the chat. Question says, how much does one have to pay to get true tingles? Are they catching? All right. More people arguing with each other. All right. I got to get caught up. Where are these at? Okay, it's about 10 minutes in. Hey, Maverick Christian is here. What's up? So Maverick says, I arrived late. I guess I'll have to comment later. Curious to see if there are straw men here in my video. You might think that there are. And I certainly got animated. So I hope you're not too offended at my fury, but I wouldn't be surprised if you were. I'm sure we're going to have disagreements. All right. Let's see what else. All right. You did not need to give me money, but I do appreciate it. Thank you. So Maverick has thrown $5 my way. And that's, you know what? I tipped my glass tea, which is now empty. No, I had one drop left in there. If you can throw money at a critic, especially when they're as harsh as I am, that's pretty noble. I appreciate that. That's very cool. Thank you for doing that. You definitely get a thumbs up for me, and I think I think we're highly of you for doing that. Although I do now kind of feel a little bit bad because I've been so harsh So you might regret throwing that in my direction, but I do appreciate it. All right. Nitty says, I like you donating. Yeah, it's a nice thing to do. Respect for engagement. Yeah, yeah. All right, let's see what else. Always says summary. Lance thinks C.S. Lewis is awesome. Again, though, I've never seen any like philosophical remark. I like those Chronicles of Narnia movies. I never read the books, but what is it like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, something like that. The first couple of movies, I didn't see whatever came after that. I thought they're pretty good. Like I was younger. It's probably still too old for them to be like amazing. But I watched the Harry Potter movies like a couple years ago, and I was like, yeah, these are fine. I wasn't super impressed, but I never read those books either. I grew up reading a lot of fantasy, and for whatever reason, Harry Potter never jumped out to me as something to read. But yeah, Chronicles of Narnia was cool. All right. Coffee's is like, Lance, we get it. It's BS. Well, that was like 7-8 minutes ago. Nitty says 1.9K. Are you talking about my number of subscribers? Yeah, I haven't hit 2,000 subscribers yet. When I was talking about subscribers, I was talking about over on Substack, which I just hit 800. Oh, right. Maverick says I recommend a good pop filter. I have one around here somewhere, and it allegedly would attach to the mic, but it wasn't attaching very well. I haven't had anybody complain about the audio issues before, so I don't know what the issue is. Also, I was yelling, so that's probably why, if you think I need one. Says you mentioned people saying you have to pay a cost. Yeah, the qualia tax. Yeah, okay, now I see, understand the reference. My bad. All right, still going through the comments. People mostly arguing with each other. Maverick says got more live viewers than my video did. Well, wasn't yours a premiere? So live videos might get you more views than a premiere because like with the live video, like people could talk direct. Like I'm actually reading people's comments and stuff like that. It's just a little better than premieres. I sometimes run premieres on my channel and they never get that many live viewers at once, maybe 5 or 6. I haven't checked. I don't know. It's not that many. But for whatever reason, people get real confused about premieres. They often think that they're live. Yeah, Coffee's noticed the freezing issue seems to be a bit better. It is a bit better. I still don't know what it is, and I'm still pretty annoyed at what's the StreamYard is what I use. They also implemented some new feature that stuck this tab on the side, and I have problems with non-minimalist UIs, and they start sticking tabs all over the place. I was able to get that fixed, but not a fan. All right, let's keep going with the video.
Believe in morality. In psychology, there's something called cognitive dissonance, a person having conflicting thoughts like conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. Cognitive dissonance can cause mental discomfort. So, to avoid such discomfort, some people turn away from the source of that discomfort. Consider, for example, these follow-up questions again. One way to deal with such questions is to not address them. I think a lot of people who reject premise 1 or 2 would feel uncomfortable saying yes to either of these 2 questions. How to avoid that discomfort? Don't answer the question. Ignore it. Avert thy gaze. Don't ask yourself whether it's reasonable to hold to your beliefs. Just believe. I find it a bit ironic that such abandonment of reason is the stereotype some atheists give religious folks.
All
It's
right.
not to say there isn't any truth to that stereotype. Some religions.
So I'll take this back in a second. I was looking something up. So, one moment. Discompliance. Yeah. I'm not going to throw it up here until I say more about it. But I will say that the old cognitive dissonance was this long-standing view in psychology. But there was a recent multi-lab attempt at replicating one of the mean paradigms used, as far as I know, to test for cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Okay. Here, I'll throw a link in the chat so you could have a look at this. But basically, it's not so clear that cognitive dissonance is like all that significant a force in human psychology.
Religious folks really are irrational, but
Lorenzo, hey, what's up? How are you doing? Don't try to get me speaking Portuguese here. I haven't been practicing for a while, so it's not going to happen. But what's up anyway? All right.
will say yes to either of these two questions. How to avoid that discomfort? Don't answer the question. Ignore it. Avert thy gaze. Don't ask yourself whether it's reasonable to hold to your beliefs. Just believe. I find it a bit ironic that such abandonment of reason is the stereotype some atheists give religious folks. It's not to say there isn't any truth to that stereotype. Some religious folks really are irrational, but if I learned that my belief system said that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun, I'd abandon that belief system. Seems to me that not
This doesn't really have a whole lot to do with atheism, though. I don't know. What does this have to do with atheism? Like atheists can be moral realists. Christians can be anti-realist or moral skeptics. I don't really know what's going on with this.
non-theists should do the same if their belief system says that there's nothing wrong with torturing infants just for fun. Another objection I've seen is that this argument appeals to emotion. Here I think we need to distinguish between appealing to emotion and appealing to evidence that evokes emotion. If I say that you shouldn't accept a certain belief because the belief is offensive, that would be appealing to emotion. If, on the other hand, I'm arguing that a certain early 1940s German dictator was a bad guy and citing historical evidence for that belief, that evidence may evoke emotion, but it's not appealing to emotion. Similarly, even if this argument
Yeah, he's not wrong about this. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, that's an appeal to emotion," because someone presents premises that they find upsetting. If they're not arguing that, like, it's some claim is false because it's offensive or because of some emotion it evokes, then they're not. It's not a fallacy. If the premise evokes an emotion in you, um, like tough shit if that's not part of what the argument is about. So he probably, I wouldn't surprise me at all if he's reporting on the kinds of experiences that he's encountered when he argues with people online, because people say all kinds of dumb shit. They don't understand how fallacies work. A lot of informal fallacies. It's like, I don't even know what they're called, fallacies. Often you have these like real goofy lines of reasoning that people will throw out there that like might be used to support some kind of inference, or they might be misconstruals of some argument that they're misconstruing what the argument is actually trying to do. And in that case, they may be thinking that a fallacy is going on when it's not. But all the like fallacy as a term is quite appropriate when you're talking about like invalid arguments. But when we're talking about informal, like take like slippery slope. Like if someone says, "Hey, but if this happens, then this thing will happen, and then this thing will happen," and there's some sometimes there are chain reactions that will happen. If a person does this, then that'll happen, and this will happen, and that'll happen. So it's not necessarily a fallacy to claim that there would be a slippery slope. It's in many cases going to be like an empirical question whether a slippery slope would occur and whether it's likely that it would occur. So it'd be really weird to say, your argument against this thing is bad because you're appealing to a slippery slope. Well, it's appropriate in some cases and not in others. It would only be a problem if there were some, like if there's some extraneous reason for thinking that the slippery slope isn't a real slippery slope. So, a lot of times fallacies are like these informal fallacies are misused because they're not necessarily mistakes. There's something real goofy about them. As far as Mason asking, has anything survived the replication crisis? I swear everything I learned in college I keep hearing is up for debate. Not much. Yeah, a lot of it has been refuted. I don't know, like for the stuff that hasn't been refuted, people haven't looked at it yet. So there's a good chance it'll be refuted too. Yeah, Maverick. So I get that. So Maverick says much of this video came out of responses I've had with interacting with people in this argument. So you're probably arguing with a bunch of people that don't know what they're talking about, and that's really unfortunate. And if a lot of your objections are directed at them, I get that. But that doesn't mean that the question that you posed in those three different forms, like it would remain morally wrong. I still think I think it's a bad question, because I think the question is ambiguous and it's going to confuse people. And I don't know that their answers are going to be diagnostic of anything in particular. All right.
appeals to evidence that evokes emotion, it's not appealing to emotion. I'm not, for example, saying we shouldn't reject premise one because denying premise one is offensive. I'm saying that denying premise one is not reasonable. It's not reasonable to believe that there's nothing wrong with torturing infants just for fun. This is
But like, why should I think that that's not reasonable? Why? Like, is it just an appeal to your intuitions?
Appeal to reason, not emotion. All the emotions in the world won't change what's reasonable to believe here. Talking about emotions is a kind of red herring. It distracts from whether the premises are reasonable to deny. The evidence, the premises, is still evidence for moral objectivism if we know that the premises are true. Whether this evidence evokes emotions just doesn't matter. It's still evidence that supports the conclusion. Emotions are irrelevant. Logically, you still need a false premise for the argument to be sound. So if none of the premises are reasonable to deny, talking about emotions isn't going to solve the problem. Part 3, conclusion. By moral objectivism, I
So that's it for this video. I got through another one. All right, so that's 2 streams in one day. Oof. All right. I got really worked up there. I don't know what's going to happen with my YouTube channel and blog. I am pretty burnt out on this stuff. I think I'm just realizing that right now as I did this video. So I did 2 videos and now I'm like, I think I need a break. I don't know what other kind of content to produce. You know, I don't want to make content to make content. I'm not an output factory. I want to do something that I care about, something I'd like to talk about. But I'm not sure what. You know, I've wanted to get people on here to talk about my issues with peer review and academic publishing. Still wanting to do that. I'd like to get people on here. You know, one thing I'd really love to do is reach out to people doing experimental philosophy, get them on here to talk about their projects. I'd love to do that. So if you think there's anybody I should bring on the channel to just have them talk about their research, I'd love to do that because, you know, there's only so much I could talk about from my own point of view. I'd love to hear from other people and get them on the channel. So, you know, maybe I could do call-in shows, kind of like what I was doing on TikTok for a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I really am. I'm frustrated with feeling like I've hit a dead end with the metaethics stuff. I can honestly say I don't find any of the arguments for moral realism any good. I just the more I look, the more I'm not finding myself interested by the topic. I'm finding myself intrigued by how catastrophically mishandled an academic field can be once you pop up in the box and peer inside. When I read academic work on metaethics, I'm not any more impressed or blown away than I am. Like, people are less rude; they're more polite. But a lot of these sophisticated arguments just ring hollow to me too, and often just for technical reasons. And it's not very interesting. You know, I don't often bring up some of the technical stuff, and it's really not my bag to get too much into the technical stuff and the formalisms in philosophy. But you know, when I look at this stuff, I'm just like, okay, so you've got this big fancy formal argument. What the hell does that word mean that you're using in like half your premises? There's no clarification. There's no explanation. And there's like some hand wavy remark about it. Well, then I don't care about the rest of your argument. I don't care how fancy it is. If you can't disambiguate and clarify what the hell you mean by some fundamental terms in it, none of it's going to fly with me. I'm just going to go, I don't know how to evaluate the truth of these premises. I mean, this is what happens with humor's ontological argument. People think the argument is brilliant. Maybe it is, but you know, he uses terms and concepts in there. I don't think it's clear what the terms and concepts mean. And I don't think he'd be able to explain what they mean. It's going to be some ineffable stuff where you're just supposed to have the concept. I don't have it. I don't think there's a concept to have. So I don't think the people claiming they have it have the concept. So then what do? There's nowhere further to go. I think the argument appears to be unintelligible to me. And so that puts me in an awkward position because I don't have all the sophisticated response to engage in within that dialectical framework because I reject the whole dialectical framework. I think it's based on misunderstandings about language and confusions about words, on failures to resolve ambiguities, and getting truth tingles in response to these undifferentiated terms and remarks that people employ. I mean, it's for me, it's like Wittgenstein is right. And so many of these problems or apparent problems are just pseudo problems that have, for me, started to dissolve. And so, you know, I feel like I've approached the mirage and I'm now at the point where I've stepped, you know, across the dunes and I've arrived at the point and the mirage is resolved. There's nothing there anymore. It's gone away. So I'm not seeing the palm trees in the distance and the water and thinking, I have a theory that that's not really there. I've arrived and it's not there. I was right. And so now the question is, what do I do? Because I haven't seen a single serious argument for moral realism that I find challenging this whole time I've been doing this. No, and by that I don't mean like, ooh, that one was kind of tough, but I got past it. No, none of it is ever even remotely challenging. It's companions of guilt. Oh no, okay, yeah, I just accept that there's no stance independent epistemic normative facts. So what? Big deal. I think there's no implications of that. Oh, it's self-defeating. No, it's not. It'd only be self-defeating if I thought you needed stance independent epistemic norms to justify things. I don't think you do. It's not self-defeating. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is trivially easy to deal with. Argument from deliberation, like if we went look to the argument, like you want to minimize arbitrariness. No, I don't care about that. Not an issue. So I'm just not doing what Enoch thinks I'm doing, and I don't have the intuitions that he thinks that I have, and I don't think the aim of morality is what he thinks that it is, and I don't think I reason about these issues, or that people generally reason about the issues in the ways that he supposes. Just think, sometimes there's empirical claims. I think those claims are almost always false, or they're totally unsubstantiated. People, argument for moral experience. We experience morality as a realm of objective moral fact. No, we don't. Yeah, no, we don't. If you want to make a case for that, then present the empirical evidence. Oh, you don't have it? Oh, too bad. Because it's not something, we don't have that. So I don't accept that argument. So like what do realists have? Argument for moral convergence. Nope, we have alternative explanations that are much better than appealing to stance independent moral facts. Done. Ontological argument appeals to notions of reasons and moral facts that it's not clear whether they're intelligible. Done. Naturalist arguments, I don't care if the arguments are true. They're all trivial. So those are trivial. So done. So like what am I supposed to deal with at this point? What do I do? Yeah, Sapir says maybe focus more on philosophy of mind stuff. I don't have that much to say about it. Just like go let scientists do their work or something. Like what do I have to say about that? All right, what should I do, Mr. Serpa? Yeah, so Question Quander says time to write a couple books. Yeah, I just submitted actually I shouldn't talk about that. I did get a paper published a few months ago. It was an empirical paper. I'm a co-author on it. I submitted a recent paper for publication, but there's a lot of work for my dissertation I'd like to submit. I have a few papers to work on for publication, but as far as a book, I don't know what to write a book on. I've thought about writing a metaethics textbook. I want to include a chapter critiquing other textbooks, so I thought about doing that. So philosophy of mind, I don't know. Why don't you do essay videos explaining the basics of your like videos? I'm not KMV. I don't have any experience of doing that. What would I talk about? Like so intro videos on metaethics, maybe intro videos on what? Like psychology of metaethics, moral psychology. Like I could do a video on like moral foundations theory or something, like something that I teach. Like I teach moral psychology. I don't know. The question says try for scripted videos in the 10 to 20 minute range. It's just so not my style, but I really got to give it a shot. Travis does it. Travis does a good job. All right. All right. Let's see. I'm still looking through the comments. I just suddenly, I don't know, the adrenaline ran out and I'm just like, I'm feeling very tired. People arguing with each other. Real name asks what my stance is on free will. So I'm a free will quietist. I think that the free will dispute is a complete load of nonsense. I don't accept any of the views. I'm not an incompatibilist, a compatibilist, or a libertarian. Like, what is free will supposed to be? So the definition you'll get from philosophers is just something real silly. It's like the conditions necessary for desert-based moral responsibility. Well, I don't believe in desert-based moral responsibility. I don't know what it would mean for there to be, like, I don't presume that there's got to be conditions that would be necessary for it. And then the question is what they are. I think it's the whole idea that there's like like I see free will as this, it's like a placeholder term for, and the dispute is about what the term is picking out. Compatibilists and libertarian proponents of free will, they're not arguing about the same concept. Like the arguments are about different concepts. So I don't know. The hell are they trying to do? So like if you're getting any of the fancy metaphysics stuff, I don't think you need any of that. None of that. Like how would we get any view about libertarian free will other than using like non-empiricist methods that I would have no particular reason to take very seriously? I don't think there is. So I'm not going to take those very seriously. And then as far as compatibilist free will, like it's supposed to be true that we have free will. I mean, when you break down what some of these accounts amount to, they amount to these like socially constructed type of processes, or on opting to characterize certain descriptive facts in by saying, hey, I'm going to label these conditions or these characteristics or this set of considerations. I'm going to call that free will. Like people just, it's like a pin the term on the concept. That's what philosophers are playing here, where they'll say, okay, I've got this concept free will. I got to stick it on to something. And so the compatibilists go out and they find some phenomena that they're like, that seems kind of free willish. Let's stick it there. We'll call that free will. And it's like phenomena they describe is always like some socially constructed fact or some set of descriptive, like psychological facts or something like that. Those are going to exist whether you call it free will or not. So what do you get by calling it that? Other than sticking the label on it and going, ooh, I put a label on it. So I think the whole dispute is a big waste of time. We have like practical questions to ask, like, how do we want to run society? How do we want to treat the people around us? If you're going to throw someone in jail, are you going to throw them in jail for what reason? So these are just practical questions. We get to decide the answers to these collectively based on our preferences and our values. There's not like some deep metaphysical fact to discover here. So yeah, I don't really think that the free will dispute is going anywhere. I think it's a phenomenal waste of time. Yeah. Yeah, Ben says compatibilism all the way. I'm not a compatibilist. All right. So sorry to end on I think I sound like I'm like depressed or something. I'm not. I'm not sure how much of this I could keep doing for now. Maybe I just need a break. I've been at it a lot. I've added a lot of streams. So it's not a bad thing. Maybe I'll take a couple weeks off. Knowing me, I'll be back on here tomorrow ranting about some other video. I said there were 5. I only got through 1. So we'll see. But that's going to do it for me for tonight. So thanks everybody for being here. This is a lot of fun. Angela said, what did you say earlier about the replication crisis? I said that the cognitive dissonance stuff doesn't seem to have held up well in some recent work on replication issues. I think the replication crisis is, if anything, much more serious than anybody has really adequately appreciated. And I think there's deeper issues than just the failure to replicate. I think there's validity issues. I think there's generalizability issues. There's issues with measurement. I mean, that's part of the whole validity thing. There's a lot of issues, and just go out and look. Go to look at replication. Is it replication index? I think that's what it's called. Let me check. Yeah, replication index, and you can see there's just an absolutely extraordinary amount of data fraud and data fabrication, and people are sorry, that's basically the same thing. Data fabrication, people doing pretty suspicious stuff. There's paper mills. There's people publishing papers that ghost authorships. There's so much crap going on in the academic world right now. The cutthroat arms race of publish has just led people to just abject desperation. And it's a very toxic system, this academic publishing system. It's not in a healthy state. In philosophy, at least, there's not enough people to review papers. it's just people are having all their work and their futures and their career prospects bottlenecked by a publishing process that is in many ways arbitrary and random and lacks transparency and is at the expense of taxpayers and students and the general public, while publishers just make massive profits off of taking your hard-earned, like your work, often publicly funded work, and then siloing it away and stuffing it behind paywalls where most people can't access it. And I just think the whole thing is absolutely atrocious and outrageous, and it's unbelievable that people are tolerating this for a single moment more. It's obnoxious what's going on. It's terrible. And all right, Lorenzo, you're out of here then. Boa noite. Yeah, I just think there's lots of problems with academic publishing. Oh, that's not even the replication crisis. But yeah, the replication crisis is just the tip of the iceberg for deeper problems in academia, and it's not confined to psychology. There are replication issues in other fields as well. And again, and it's not even just replication. So you have basically people think of a replication crisis in psychology, and I'm saying it's not just replication. There are many other crises, and it's not just in psychology. So we're in trouble. We're in trouble. All right, everybody. Have a good night.